She says you're a Tuskegee Airman.
He's Chinese as far as I'm concerned.
He said, I said, I was this flight instructor there. Do you remember me? He said, I remember your name. He said, yes, I do. And I said, who was your flight instructor? He said, Wendell Lipscomb. Now, Wendell Lipscomb is a psychiatrist down here in Berkeley. He lives in Berkeley. So I said, sure enough, you know, he started talking like that. So he said, I'd sure like to meet you. So I said, yeah, I'd like to meet you too. And the next day, Eline and I went. And there was his daddy's picture. Now, we're talking about, this man's 86 years old. And we're talking about way back then, you know, 1919 or something like, you know, 17. Mm-hmm. And his daddy's got that little hat that the Chinese wore. I said, that's your mother? He says, yes. He said, I said, well, how did you get to Tuskegee? He said, well, I went down to sign up for the thing. They wanted to know my daddy's name and my mother's name and stuff like that. And they actually, what color were they and stuff like that. And he said she was colored and he was Chinese. And he sent him to Tuskegee.
Mm. When did they start Tuskegee?
1941.
Oh, so you were in right at the very beginning.
Oh yeah, I started instructing in 1942 when they just started.
They had just started, yeah. Huh.
It was different. We were viciously attacked. We were isolated. The war had been going on since 1939 over there, I believe, 38. Mm-hmm. And maybe some people, I think President FDR, I think he wanted to do something, but his hands were tied. We were isolationists. Nobody wanted to go, but leave them people alone. And but when they attacked us, everybody was involved.
And we were all together.
All together. We knew who the enemy was. Mm-hmm. We were not partial to anything, and it was we were not divided. When Hitler went in on his rampage in Europe, he was the bad guy. A round pie, not a slice missing. That calls for not necessarily plenty money, but enough money. Nice clothes, but not overboard. Enough food for your kids, education, a whole pie, not a slice missing.
The best you can, you know. Yes, we had 10.
And you had how many before the war? You didn't have any
Not
before
any.
the war. That's
In
right.
fact, we didn't have children right away. We were married three years before age 8.
Children, yeah.
That's right. Right.
I said, good thing I maybe at 20.
So
during my day, there were no nylon hosiery.
That's right.
We wore silk stockings. And I remember during the period I was in Tuskegee, and it was winter, and I had no stockings because all of the silk was kept to make parachutes, and I knew a parachute rigger. She showed me how to rig a parachute. But I went to church one day with bare legs and froze. Consequently, now that I have nylons, I always have a drawer full of nylons. You're in Catholic parochial school for the first 8 years. And thereafter, I went to public school. And I graduated from high school and was promoted to go to normal teacher's school, 2 years college, where I received a degree and I was able to teach. And I liked my job. I taught a first grade class for 8 years. During that period, I met Adolf before I was appointed. But we couldn't get married right away because a teacher couldn't be I was a substitute teacher by that time. I could not be appointed until after marriage if I wanted to remain in that. That was a southern Louisiana law. They would not appoint me unmarried if I was going to get married. So, in other words, I was married, and the next month I was appointed. And 7 weeks after that, World War II broke out. Pearl Harbor. And I was so happy that I had a job to keep me well occupied because Adolf left. He'll tell you more about his flying experience, but at that time he went to Tuskegee, and I think it was a secondary training where he studied to be a flight instructor. Well, we went to the same schools and the same church. We were Catholic. And I knew all of his family before I met him. I knew his brothers, but he was a little ahead of me, so he had gone to Xavier Prep. So we didn't meet in school or at church. But one of his cousins, first cousin, told me, "I have a cousin who would like to meet you." I said, "Oh, really?" But somehow I went to a little house party, and I spotted him near the piano. And I looked at him, I said, "He looks like a Moret." So I went up to him and said, "Are you related to the Morets?" And he says, "Yes, I'm Adolf." And that's how we met. My memory is not very sharp, you know. I'm 84. So I have to really rack my brain. Nevertheless, we didn't go steady, as the saying goes, for a while. I had other friends, quite a few friends. I had an opportunity to pick and choose. Anyway, we met in balls. You know, Louisiana is noted for its carnival balls, where the women dress up. I didn't have a debutante party, but I went to the balls with friends, and once we met at a ball, and we danced, and we made a date. And that was our first date. It was a kind of a storybook romance. Well, we're together 63 years, I'll just add that. So it must have been a good job there. We lived with my mother and father. We had a rather large house, and they gave us the 2 front rooms. And we were married 6 weeks, as I said previously, when war started. But I had a place to stay while he went for training, and I continued to teach school. I could walk to school. The school was about 6 blocks from my house. So I was well occupied and waited. We corresponded a lot, practically wrote each other every day. Well, after having 10 children and moving to Los Angeles and then moving up to Santa Rosa, a lot of things get thrown away in the shuffle. I'm sorry to say I don't have one of those beautiful letters, but I have it in my memory. I recall them that well, only that they were very tender. He missed me, I know that. Oh, I should say, Tuskegee was not Alabama, that was where he was not very far from New Orleans. I can't recall how many hours, but we traveled by train. And whenever I had a long holiday, a long weekend, I was in Tuskegee. And we stayed at Dorothy Hall, which was the guest house. And every summer, I spent over there. And one of the summers, after 3 years, I became pregnant for our first child. Therefore, I could get maternity leave from my job. And I stayed in Tuskegee and had this child, first child, delivered at the Institute by a very good doctor. And thereafter, we had another child, a girl. First one was Adolf III, and this other one was Deanna, 18 months later, during the war. We had a little apartment. We were very happy there. We were flying at the local airport. He was just taking us up in a rented plane. We had another couple with us. One of them was a school teacher, a friend of mine, and her husband. We had a good time, and they grounded all the planes before I had a chance to get my ride. And we didn't know, they couldn't tell us why. But on our way home, we turned on the car radio and got the news and heard the President Roosevelt give his speech about Pearl Harbor being attacked. I personally didn't even know where it was. Where was Pearl Harbor? I had to go and look it up. With all my teaching experience, I needed to study a little bit more geography. Well, we soon found out. I'm happy to say that in very late years, we made a trip to the memorial, which was very moving. So I had a chance to see it. My first and only trip to Hawaii.
We're going to take up to the other end of the war.
Yes.
On VJ Day. Do you remember where you were when the end of the war came? What your thoughts were? Who you were with? Did you do any celebrating? What did it was a long time.
Yes, it is.
In that war. Sense of relief.
The war was very long, and the shortages were enormous in a way. Silk, for example. I'll just give you that one little statement to tell you about the war condition. I remember this even in Tuskegee. It was very cold and I had no hosiery, stockings. We didn't have nylons in those days. The silk the stockings were made of silk. But because the country needed silk to make parachutes, there were just no more stockings. I had to go to church one morning with freezing legs. Consequently, I have a drawer full of stockings. Nylons today. Anyway, that's a tidbit. We didn't really feel too much. Sugar, that was rationed. Gasoline was rationed. But my dad had a truck, and he got a lot of stamps. They gave out stamps for these items that were in short. And he didn't drive his truck that much, so we had gasoline to be able to commute, to take trips in our car. He gave them to us. Well, I was still on leave for those, one leave went into another one. That was 18 months, I don't remember, they give you 3 years. So I had one maternity leave after the other. I can't even recall. I went back to school to teaching after I had the fourth child, Dwight. My mother kept him, and my aunt. And by that time, he was out of the service, and he had built a house by that time in New Orleans, our first home. He built it, and I helped him, picked up the nails. He had men to help, the neighbors and friends. I'd make some sandwiches on Sunday, nice roast beef sandwiches. That's how the people in New Orleans built their homes. Friends helped them. But it was a wonderful thing because he learned how to do what he's doing now. He's a general contractor as a result. He builds sheds, by the way, now, not houses. But it started him. He can tell you more about that. Well, we were for a while in touch with other friends. But as time goes on, we're getting older, they're getting older. Responsibilities are changing. You hardly have time when you're bringing up children and taking part in their school activities in your life that you sort of lose. As time went on, we kind of lost touch with these friends. There may be one or two that we'll send a card to or a note or a telephone call, but not too many. They're busy as well as we are. And now they're getting older, those that are still around. Well, when we first came up here, we knew no one. And then the very next door neighbor, right next to our place, this is sort of, in the county they call it. It's not it's Santa Rosa, but we're on Petaluma Hill Road, which is outside. We're in the county, but our post office is Santa Rosa. We met the Jameses first, who were living right next door to us. But then I met the Langs, who lived across the street. They had a beautiful place, And most of their children, that's Joe and Betty, were similar to the ages of my children, so they were in the same schools. We went to the activities. We just became good friends. In fact, she's about the best friend I've ever had. A true friend, believe me. And she and Joe, I know, are an ideal couple. Her husband was a pilot, mine was a pilot. And she took me to my first Bible class. I appreciate that so much. I like going to the World War II pilots group. It's refreshing. We've made quite a few nice friends. Just to see them has been a blessing. And I particularly like it because I can meet with my good friends Joe and Betty, who have moved from across the street from over 20 years now. They're living in Casadera. And it's a little distance for us to visit them. So that's my one chance to see them. And when they're not there, by whatever reason, I miss it. That was the main reason for my wanting to go back. Because it's a group of men, which I enjoy the men's company, but I look forward to seeing the wives that I know. Well, there's just one occasion that I could say, not too long ago. Well, I know Joe has had some health problems, and he wanted to put some gravel down, and she has her health problems. And praise the Lord, Dolf and I have good health, real good health. So we met when they were ready to pull this gravel and helped them rake it. It was a wonderful time. And I could see Joe couldn't do. He tried. We didn't want him to do anymore. We were able to complete the whole job. And we had a wonderful day, and she had us to lunch. Well, they've been back and forth here. We've had lunch together. Sometimes we meet. We've met at Red Lobster and had dinner together. I just can't remember all the nice, memorable times. Also, we've met at funerals, if it's a mutual friend. Weddings and funerals, I think old friends do meet. Because like when the James passed, we saw them at the funeral. When there's happy occasions, another neighbor behind us, Derisha, moved, and they had a farewell party. We met them. They're tops in my book. I can truly say I love them. I don't have a sister, so I've adopted her. Be grateful for what you have. Be satisfied with what you have. And honor and respect your parents. And love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's about what I would tell my grandchildren. I think that covers so much. I'm saddened by today's war. Number one, they didn't strike us, really. We struck them, unprovoked. I'm talking about Iraq now. Well, I don't know, that sounds like I'm going into politics. Well, I see young people spending money like it's never going to end. And I'm afraid that they need to be careful. This economy could slip tomorrow. We saw a crash years ago. We were young. We understood its impact. And I don't believe in all this debt. Refinancing the house to get this, to go there, and I don't know where they're getting. And they're not thinking about tomorrow. And each child has a cell phone, and I have found out what they cost. I don't want a cell phone. I'm happy to have one phone in my house. I realize it has conveniences, but it's very costly. One day they're going to be sorry, wish they had the money they've given to the telephone company. Computers are not in, I mean, I know that the world is The computer and the digital world is here to stay. I believe that. And it has its wonderful points. But I don't have to be part of that world. I have many children that are computer programmers, tax consultant, or CPA. All that's fine. But let them do the computer work and use the digital televisions and the digital this and that. I like the plain, simple things. They work. These other things get broken quickly. That's just the old-fashioned way. And don't watch so much television. And television is a ruination of this nation, and I think that it should be called Hell-o-vision, vision of hell. I'm sorry, I'm signing off, because I get really excited about that.
Marvelously.
Well, she gave a good dissertation there, and just about accurately enough. We were married 7 weeks, I think, when Pearl Harbor took place. I was already a pilot. I had learned to fly in West Virginia in the 1940s, real spring of 1940, and I had taken this man up Floyd up, and when we got down, the airport manager came running out and says, "Adolf, got to call ground all airplanes." I didn't know why. And so we found out on the way back, home, the radio said the Pearl Harbor had happened. And immediately I started thinking of how I can keep from getting drafted. That was my immediate thing. And since I had this newfound skill, I thought that would be the best place to do it. And I was able to go to Tuskegee. Had quite a few little interesting scenarios involved there too. But I finally got there, got my commercial and instructor's rating, and immediately I got when you get your instructor's rating at that time. I got 5 because everybody was into the business now, training people how to fly, opening up primary flying schools, and I had 5 requests to apply, but Tuskegee was one of them, and I felt I had gotten my commercial, it might be the best thing to do there, and I wasn't. I was pretty sure that I would have troubles if I went anywhere else, because I knew what the situation was. Also, one of the priests that we talked to about, I should have said what he says, "I'd go to Arizona if I were you." He says, because I don't think Tuskegee is going to make it. I think they're going to fail. And I said, "I know monkeys can fly, but if you give them an airplane," so I'm going there. And I started teaching there in the primary, and that was very memorable. That's where I got to know Chappie James. And later on, I think it was 1944, I had the opportunity to go on active duty. I was appointed as a flight officer. And so now I was on active duty, not just a reservist. And then later on, I think in early 45, I got the S out of my wings, and I got lieutenant's bars. Was discharged in 1946. And just to give you a little story about how at that time, the ordinary citizen was. I remember distinctly getting in my uniform when the war's over, or won the war, and the Union Station, I got out, this little guy comes up to me, probably too old for the draft, and he says, "Don't forget, you have to sit in the back of the bus reminding me. And I haven't had the presence of mind. I was so shocked. I didn't have the presence of mind to do the retort. I never said a word. And but I never forgot it. And I never wore my uniform again. But after that, life was pretty good. Eline alluded to our little house. I built a little house, and now we had a place to live. And she also alluded to the fact that we always wanted to go to California, and different circumstances. I think the Lord was behind it. I really do. And when we didn't respond right away after a couple of warnings, you might say, just around Christmas of 1952, I bought a Christmas tree coming from work, and I heard this crash, automobile crash, across the neutral ground. I ran over there immediately, and this lady was crying and saying, call my son. And we were right in front of a police station, and I thought that was a good place to go to get help. And her little 10-year-old granddaughter went in with me, and her husband was slumped over the wheel, and ran in there, and they said I was meddling in white people's business, and put me in jail. Charged me with disturbing the peace in the police station. Well, that was the one. We left for California right after the trial, which was dismissed because the little girl had given me her dad's phone number, and her dad was there, and the mother was there, and the little girl spoke, and the judge just threw the case out. So we went to California, and we had a very good life. Yeah, Southern California, Los Angeles. And I retired from the post office there, and 1970, we moved up here. And later on, I joined the World War II pilots group, and in Caleb Garham's column, she said friend or foe was invited. I didn't know if they'd consider me a friend or a foe, but I was qualified, and I went. I was warmly received, and I made friends with a lot of people, and stories that I really am glad to have heard. I would not have heard otherwise. One that is particularly warm to my heart was one in which a German pilot, ex-German pilot, met a man who had a World War II fighter pilot on his license plate, and by the name of Mozart. And he said, "Are you the fighter pilot?" He says, "Yes, I am." He said, and Mozart said, "Are you a fighter pilot?" So naturally, Peter answered in the affirmative, and they shook hands before Peter had a chance to tell him he was a German. And he said, "I hate you." He hated Germans, and he hated all Germans, but this guy in particular. But later on, as a telephone call to the German requesting a ride to the World War II pilots, and he said, "I don't hate you anymore." I think that was a wonderful story of forgiveness. And it's the story of my life, too. Even though I'm willing to talk about the past, I'm not upset by it. It's just history. He was an outstanding individual. Although we were friends at Tuskegee as civilian flight instructors, he wanted to be a cadet. And he started off right from the beginning as a primary student. And since none of us could teach him anything, we used to take turns just flying with him until he got his number of hours. And after that, I did not get to see him that often. And but from reading his book, he was a daredevil out to prove a point. That anybody can do anything if they want to and have the, certain capabilities. And he wanted to fly combat so bad that although he was trained as a twin-engine pilot, also, he wanted to fly the P-40, and he couldn't fit in it with the parachute.
It's big.
He got the crew chief to keep quiet when he flew without the parachute. That was in this book. His mother also is in this book, but they bring out that he was quite active behind the scenes because he could fly different places. He was transferring messages from one place to another. This is the focus of what his support for this group. But his mother was from New Orleans, and when she married Mr. James, they went to Florida. She was not happy with the school system there, and she had been raised by the nuns. So she opened up her own school, in which he was one of the students, and other people. She had a private school there. He speaks very glowingly of his mother, and she told him that you can't change the color of your skin, but you make sure you do all the rest of the stuff right, to that effect. And evidently that impressed him. He was always on to do better. I was so glad to hear that he got to be a four-star general, but most of that was in the Vietnam area war, and as a fighter pilot, jet fighter pilot. He number of incidences there. He broke rules to save comrades, and he got the attention. He was always able to very easily meet big wheels, generals, and he never lost an opportunity to get on the side of somebody. He was a big man, commanding. He could sing well, and he was an athlete, and everybody likes athletes, from Joe Louis on down and everything. And so I know that was very interesting. There's so many stories that you hear in different aspects of it. This man, he just talks about the Freedmen Fuel Mutiny, and then Mr. Lee Archer spoke about the change in the military's attitude on its minorities. I personally think they have not addressed that in its actual really, that we just haven't been as democratic as we think we are. One of you mentioned to Eline about World War II and the present situation. My thoughts on that is no nation since the Civil War, which the South attacked the North, at South Carolina, attacked Fort Sumter. No nation who were aggressive and started preemptive strikes has won. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't get into war. But this is the first time we have started one, with a preemptive strike. And in thinking about that, which I haven't heard before, even if Iraq, which is a sovereign country, had weapons of mass destruction and attempted to deliver them here, they're so far away, we are so large with bases all over. How could they attack us, do such damage that we could not retaliate with our 7,000 of them? So that was my reasons for not going to war. And I still feel that now that we don't have the weapons of mass destruction, they had some ulterior motives, I think. You know, it's funny, this generation, you know, my generation, people that, the Tuskegee Airmen in that generation, they, I think, by and large, most of them has forgiven the past. And it's my perception that since it was the government that had these laws, but in 1965, Lyndon Johnson abolished all laws of segregation, legal segregation. So anybody under 40 years of age has never known what it is. The generation in between could have and apparently have been subject to this, the sins of the past, and feel more vocal about it, and because they're parents, you feel pretty bad when your parent or someone is hurt, and you hear these stories, and the struggle has been very, during my lifetime, the struggle. I have to admire people like that lady, golly, I can't remember her name. She wouldn't sit, she wouldn't get up a seat.
Parks?
Yeah, Parks, yeah.
Rosa Parks.
Rosa Parks. And then they struggled in the 60s, which I believe was the big turning point, because television was now worldwide, and everybody had a television like people have cell phones today. And the whole world, including Iraq and those other countries, saw us in 6 o'clock news in color, how we treated our minorities here. And I think that was the turning point when people said, wow, is this us? And I won't mention names, but I had a personal experience about 9 years ago. A man and I were doing some volunteer work, and we were building forms for concrete to be poured, and he says, I understand you're a Tuskegee Airman. And I said, yes, I am. I was one of their flight instructors. But he didn't ask any more questions. The following week, we met to a group, and this man had a Confederate hat on. I didn't know what it meant, and I recall thinking, well, his head was cold, and that's all he had to wear, and that's okay. We finished, about 6 of us talked, what we were going to do that day. But he turned to me, and on his T-shirt, he had a shape of a tree with 4 hanging figures on it, not identified as humans, but no particular animals. I just looked up then, he was facing me, and I said, oh, a rebel. Word I can't remember ever using before. And he said, yes, and proud of it. And I said, I'm a rebel too. Question marks came in his eyes. And then I said, I'm trying to be like Jesus Christ, who was a rebel. This guy walked off. 2 years later, he called me on the telephone and invited me to go to the air show in August. At that time, I was not a member of the Pacific Coast Air Museum. He says, you'll be my guest. It took that much for me to say yes. We went to the air show, walked all around, and if you look up there, you'll see I'm sitting in a F-16. He took that picture. And we can finish kicking the tour, and then we went to the other areas, and they had a Tuskegee Airman had a booth. And I said, oh, the Tuskegee Airmen are here. And I walked over to them. 2 lieutenant colonels sitting down. One was a command pilot. He had that little emblem that he used, I forgot how many hours, he had plenty of hours. And I said, I'm a Tuskegee Airman. I was a Tuskegee Airman. And these 2 guys says, what is your name? Because I didn't know them and they didn't know me. And I told them Adolf Moret. They both jumped up, grabbed my hand and started shaking it. I introduced him to this man. He was with another man, an older guy. They both bought 2 books. Each one bought a book called The Lonely Eagles. And they asked me to autograph it. And that's the first time I had had an autograph of anything at all, you know. We have this nation with a beautiful constitution, but we didn't follow it. We decided that these people are not worthy to be part of it. And it became worldwide, became government controlled. And anyhow, that's one little bit that I think. I also feel, if you think about it enough, there's a lot of little fish in the ocean. Microscopic. Because the whales, that's what they eat. But they must have a lot of little fish, because the big fish always eat the little fish. And then we take fish too. We eat some of those fish. But we still have plenty of fish. And I think we need the help that they get from the poor, the down. Mexicans come over here now illegally. They risk their lives getting over here. And we use them. Just recently I heard this man on the radio. He was asked what these politicians are going to do about the illegal immigrants. Nothing. Democrats, Republicans, and for the past 100 years, they haven't done a thing about it. They ain't going to do nothing. They talk about it, but they won't do it because we need them. We use them, just like we use the fish in the ocean. Don't have an answer, but we are very vulnerable.
Sorry to say
we are using up the world's natural resources faster than it's being replenished. It took millions of years for this geologist to say that this oil has developed.
Oil and war.
And how are we going to replenish it? And well,
Who
right
wants to
now, if
change
you
his
just think
lifestyle?
about it, if we stop getting gasoline for any reason, we're in big trouble. Big trouble. Because the automobile industry, iron, metal, plastics,
Industry.
rubber,
Power. Everything.
all those are affected by automobiles grossly. I mean, you know, big, big time, plus other things. So we should be starting to do something about that instead of trying to see somebody to be a good guy. Oh, what I think happened? I think he had been brainwashed. I use the term, maybe it's not the exact one for an American, but it's into thinking that it was okay to hate other people or to put other people down. And I think it happened that I made him realize he was not being Christian.
I would like to thank Ernie for making this lovely picture of me. He's a good photographer, and perhaps
Don't hide your face.
perhaps it was a little powder and a little paint that makes a woman look like what she ain't. Anyway, thank you, and I think it's a good way to conclude. And I'd like to say also, I praise God every day that I'm married to Adolf Moret, a Tuskegee Airman.
Yeah.